Okay, we're on. He's starting in about a minute. Got a few people checked in already. The weather's clear here today, so I don't think we'll have any internet issues. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are on this planet. Last week, we did the first noble truth, suffering, dukkha, and this evening we're moving on to second noble truth, which is tanha, or craving. The word tanha, Sanskrit trishna, literally means thirst. And first thing we need to clarify is that it is narrowly and precisely defined. Sometimes you hear the objection from people who don't, who have a superficial knowledge of Buddhist teachings, that to say that desire is the cause of suffering would lead to a person having no motivation and being sort of inert, because if you don't have any desire to do anything. This is a misunderstanding. There is another word in Pali, chanda, which could also be translated desire, which is broader, sometimes translated as enthusiasm. And with chanda, it can be either skillful or unskillful, because you can have, and it's in fact necessary to have chanda for liberation, and Dhamma chanda. But tanha is always a spiritually negative impulse, and it is defined as of being of three kinds. The first is craving for sense pleasures, and that would also include the negative version, the flip side of that being aversion to sense painful sensation. And so first one is sense desire, kama tanha. Then there is bhava tanha, the desire to be or become, and vibhava tanha, which is the desire not to be. These three are named by the Buddha in the first sermon as the kinds of tanha that lead to suffering. And we spoke last time about the broad range of dukkha. So tanha for sense objects, kama tanha, is the most obvious one at our level of existence as human beings. We're in the kama bhumi, the plane of sense desire. So it is the noisiest, it demands the most attention, it's the most obvious, but it's not the deepest. It's superficial relative to the other two, which we'll get to in a bit. Kamha tanha is prevalent in our level of existence, the kama bhumi, which includes animals, humans, devas, etc. Beings that live at this level have their psyche dominated by the five physical senses. Your thoughts and for an unenlightened person, their thoughts and impulses, the desires and fears all revolve around sense objects. Beings want pleasant sense objects and they want to avoid unpleasant ones. And craving for sense objects drives beings in this realm throughout their lives. See, animals want to eat and to mate and to escape from predators. This is all powerful impulses that are driven by sense desire. And the humans as humans, we're not much better. We have the capability of rising above that level, but most human beings remain predominantly in that psychic mode for their entire existence. Sense objects can never fully satisfy the mind. This is one of the meanings of dukkha, this unsatisfying nature, that the acquisition of a desired sense object will lead to some happy feeling, sukha vedana, but this will always be insufficient and impermanent. So beings are kept on a kind of a treadmill chasing after the next shiny thing. And if we take it down to the fundamental level of mind moments, the process is the mind desires an object, takes the object and is unsatisfied with it, and then seeks the next object. This is the process of samsara at its root, at the most primordial level. Is mind seeking completion through objects, taking an object, being unsatisfied, still feeling incomplete, and its desire not quenched, immediately moves on to the next object. And this drives, this is the motive driving force in the psyche that is the engine of samsara. The Buddha often spoke about the danger of falling prey to sense desire. One of the similes that he used, very powerful imagery. If he said that if there was a beggar in the marketplace who had leprosy and he's covered in weeping sores, and he keeps beside his seat, he keeps a small brazier full of red hot coals, and every now and again with a pair of tongs he picks up one of the hot coals and presses it into one of his sores to cauterize it, and this gives him a momentary relief from the pain of the sore. And he said, if that leper were miraculously cured and could stand up and walk away whole and clean, do you think he would ever feel remorse and regret and nostalgia for his hot coals? And then he explains the metaphors that the leper is the unenlightened person, the sores, the open weeping sores are the sense organs, and the red hot coals are sense objects. So, as I said, this sense desire is the noisiest at our level of existence and demands the most attention, but it's relatively superficial compared to the other two, which are more deeply rooted. We can see this for a couple of reasons. One is if a person attains a state of jhana or existence in a Brahma world, they're beyond sense desire for as long as they're in that state. But they still are subject to bhava tanha, vibhava tanha. Likewise, in the stages of enlightenment, the anagami at the third stage has completely overcome sense desire. It doesn't arise in the consciousness stream, but he's still subject to bhava tanha. It's only the arahant who has completely eradicated these more deeply rooted kinds of craving. So these are the desires to be and not to be. The desire to be is at its root, it's simply the desire to exist. And not be is a desire to not exist. But they take more lesser forms, and we're all subject to oscillation between these two. Unless we're arhants, we're subject to oscillation between the desire to be and not to be. In their lesser forms, there would be the desire to be more and the desire to be less. The desire to be more would be the desire to be more powerful, more popular, more famous, more wealthy, what have you, to be a greater type of person. Whereas the desire to not be is a desire to throttle down the level of consciousness, because consciousness can seem burdensome at times. So this is expressed in forms like oversleeping, taking drink and drugs, vegging out in front of the TV. All these are ways of temporarily dulling the level of consciousness, so that one doesn't feel the burden of such a intense level of being. For Brahma deities, they're beyond sense desire. They have no desire for sense objects, but they're still subject to defilements like false view and the desire to be, bhava tanha. This is a very deep-rooted defilement that underlies sense desire. And while we're confused with the superficial sense desires, it's hard to even see that desire to be. So in these three forms of craving, and it's an interesting parallel. Jesus in the desert for 40 days. He was fasting in the desert for 40 days, and he was tempted by the devil. And the devil tempted him 3 times. And these 3 temptations correspond pretty closely to the 3 forms of craving. First, Jesus, because he was fasting, Jesus was fasting, the devil tempted him with food. He said, I can turn all these stones into bread and you can eat your fill. And then that's sense desire. Then Jesus rejected that. And he said, get thee behind me, Satan. And then the devil tempted him with bhava tanha to become greater than he was. And he said, if you bow down and worship me, I will make you king and ruler of the whole earth. And Jesus rejected that. And the third one was desire not to be. The devil then said, well, if you don't want anything else, just throw yourself off the cliff. So there's the three forms of craving right there. So in the Dhammacakka Sutta, where the Buddha first expounds this doctrine, he says that for the first noble truth, the project is to understand it, fully understand it, parijanati. For the second noble truth, the project is to abandon it, pahataba. And this is really the core and crux of the practice, is abandoning craving. If you look at the dependent origination, the Paticca Samuppada, a very critical juncture is the sequence from a sense object or sense contact to feeling to craving to clinging. And the word for craving is the same as in the Noble Truths, is tanha. That whenever there's a contact with the mind with an object, a sense object, this will arouse a feeling of pain, pleasure, or neutral. And the craving arises for the pleasant objects. And this is said to be the point of dependent origination, where you can practice to escape from the cycle. The feelings are a resultant. There's nothing either good or bad about a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling in the spiritual sense. They're just resultant. They just there. It's a given. It's not something we have control over. But then what you do with it is critical. If you allow yourself to fall into craving for objects which give pleasant feeling, then that will turn into clinging, upadana, and then becoming, and the whole cycle continues. And the same with an aversion to unpleasant objects. So this is the point of practice, to be mindful of the feelings and not to fall into craving. If you look at your craving for sense objects objectively, you'll see there's behind it, there's always the impulse or the desire for pleasant feelings, sukha vedana. We can have a multitude of different desires for all kinds of pleasant objects. But if you ask yourself, why do I desire this object, and trace it back all the way, it's always because you know from experience, or you imagine that this object will give you some kick of sukha vedana, some hit of pleasant feeling. So that's really what we ultimately crave, is a pleasant feeling. So it becomes the driving motive in the mind, is to seek pleasant feeling, avoid unpleasant feeling. And if we're not mindful of that, then we're living kind of unconsciously, sleepwalking, just driven back and forth by these the desire for and the aversion of pleasant and unpleasant feeling. So next week we'll deal with third noble truth, which is the end of suffering. So far, with first and second truth together, we have the picture of samsara, but we have not yet seen what to do about it. So first noble truth is the disease, or the symptoms of the disease, and second noble truth is the cause of the disease. And then we'll move on to the prognosis, and finally the cure. It's important to remember that Buddhism doesn't stop at first and second noble truth. If it did, it would be a very pessimistic and nihilistic kind of a religion, very close to Stoicism. Stoicism as a philosophy is pretty much first and second truth. But fortunately, the Buddha gave us third and fourth, which we'll be moving on to. So I'll stop there, and I can see the chat is already very busy. I'll have to scroll back, blow up my screen so I can read this tiny little font. Okay, first question. Recently read the part where you wrote about the Sudawasa realms, and I got confused because it seems that all the anagamis were past students under a Buddha. Yeah, I know that sutta you're referring to, and generally they are all recognized in that sutta. They are all students of former Buddhas. I don't think the implication is that only a direct student of a Buddha can become an anagami. Next one. It seems in the last week video comment section there's a debate about anatta and the taster of the sugar. So could you please clarify, is there a person or a taster who tastes the sugar or not? Even at the moment of tasting, is there a real you? Because some think it's close to nihilism when there's no real taster at the moment of tasting rather than seeing it as a process. I think the Buddha was quite clear about this. There is tasting, but there is no taster. The Buddha taught there's a central doctrine of the Buddha is the doctrine of anatta, the emptiness of self. So there's no it's a kind of a mental trap that we fall into, that we want to speak about a taster. And it's difficult for people to understand. There's taste and there's knowing of the taste, but there's no substantial entity doing the tasting. And the whole misunderstanding of our nature falls from this creation of a self when it's not necessary. Can desire for not being result in rebirth in lower realms? Yes, it can. If a person is really deeply fallen into vibhava tanha, that tends to lower the level of consciousness, and if they die in such a condition, they're likely to take a less advanced form, to be reborn in one of the lower realms. Okay, this looks like it's a continuation from the question about anagamis. Otherwise, these realms might be empty without a Buddha. Is it possible to be reborn in those realms these days, not having a Buddha around? The Dhamma is still here. Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's necessary to become an anagami to be in the presence of a living Buddha, although it pretty well would require that the Buddha's teachings still be extant, that one can follow the teachings of the Buddha. And we're in that condition now. We don't have a living Buddha on the planet, but we do have the teachings of the Buddha. Is there always a Buddha in at least some world system? This is not stated one way or the other. Buddha, but it is. I would say that logically, it's probably there will always be a Buddha somewhere, because if the cosmology, if we follow the cosmological model in the commentaries, the universe is infinite. So that means there's every possibility would be existent somewhere. But it's also made very clear in different places that the existence of a Buddha is an extremely rare occurrence. Next one. Thanks for mentioning aversion as flip side of desire, but still part of this truth. When after 30-minute meditating, one runs into a woolen wall of aversion, and this repeats between sittings. Advice. Well, first of all, to be conscious of it, the mind falls into habit, and this is something that can happen in meditation. That if you allow yourself, to go with that aversion, after 30 minutes, it'll keep recurring every time you sit. So the first thing would be to be clearly aware of it, and when it arises, and just notice, okay, this is just that again. It's not real. It's not important. Just keep going. Don't give into it, but also don't fall into kind of struggling with it. Just notice it and disregard it. In a recent Dhamma talk, it was said by another Ajahn, to be or not to be, that is the answer, a novel view that I wonder how you would consider if you would. Thank you. Yeah, that to be or not to be, that is the answer. That's clever. I think I can guess who might have said that, but yeah, I like it. It's like something the Buddha would do, actually, is take something from the existing culture and give it a little twist. The question of being or not being is something that we have to overcome both sides of that, and it's related. It's related to false views. That one of the ways the Buddha talked about false view was atiwada and natiwada. The view of everything exists and the view that nothing exists, and they related to bhava tanha and vibhava tanha. So we have to really get beyond both being and not being. Can deep realization into the three characteristics alone lead to awakening by itself? Essentially, yes. That's the quintessence of awakening, is penetration of the three characteristics. But that's not easily done just by itself, without all the preparatory work of sila and samadhi and so on. But the final breakthrough into nibbana is characterized by seeing deeply into the three characteristics, or at least one of them. How do you practice sense restraint, especially in everyday life? Can you give a worked example, such as if we see beautiful woman, how do we do sense restraint? Well, if you're trying to practice sense restraint, first of all, you should, if you take this example, you see a beautiful woman, say, walking on the street, that is a resultant sense object. You can't not see it. But then if you make an effort to continue looking, then that's indulging in sense experience. And that's when you're falling into craving and clinging. And particularly for a layperson, it's impossible to practice rigorous sense restraint all the time. But it's a good practice, a recommended practice, to occasionally take on the 8 precepts, for a day or for longer, for a few days. Often in Buddhist countries, lay people will take the 8 precepts on the Uposatha day for a day and a night. And the 8 precepts are designed to foster sense restraint. That's the purpose of them. And certainly if you're doing a sense restraint and not give in, not just to obvious examples like the beautiful woman, but to avoid kind of going out through the senses for diversion and amusement, to try and keep the attention directed inwardly. You said once there is a realm where there is very limited consciousness, but with a body. What is that realm called? Actually, there's a realm, I think the realm you're referring to, there's no consciousness. That's the asanya, realm, the asanya sata, the beings with no perception. They're only conscious. They can be there for very long ages of time, but They only have consciousness for 2 moments, the first moment and the last moment, and they're completely unconscious for the remainder. Let's see. Excuse me, I'm just having trouble with the interface here. I lost my place in the chat trying to expand the font. Okay, here we are. What do you see Buddhism as, religion or philosophy? I don't really care about that question, and it doesn't concern me because it's just a matter of semantics. It's a definition. Depends how you define religion. If your definition of religion has some reference to a supreme being, then Buddhism's not a religion. I don't think it really matters. It just depends on how you use the words. Some people believe the Buddha visited Sri Lanka with 500 monks. Did the Buddha truly visit Sri Lanka historically? I very much doubt it. Every Buddhist country has this kinds of stories that the Buddha came and visited them, but there doesn't seem to be any historical evidence that the Buddha ever traveled beyond the Ganges Valley. So those are inspiring stories, but they're not. They're, in my opinion, they're no more than that. In an older video, you said not to turn practice into spiritual materialism, but the Buddha enticed his cousin with promise, being with aspirers in future life. Yeah, the Buddha was the story. In case people don't know the story, the Buddha's cousin Nanda ordained as a bhikkhu, but then fell into regret and longing for his lay life, and he had been engaged to a beautiful woman, and then he abandoned her to become a monk, and he was having second thoughts. So the Buddha took him up to tower things of heaven, and he saw the divine dancing girls in heaven, the acharas or asparas in Sanskrit, and the Buddha said, if you practice diligently, when you die, you'll go to heaven and get 500 of these dancing girls. So that turned him around, and he started becoming more diligent. But then he got beyond the point of sense desire, and he gave up on wanting to go to heaven. He wanted liberation. So it's kind of a skillful means on behalf of the Buddha, just enticing Nanda. But the important point is that Nanda got beyond that. He rose beyond that desire. And when he went to see the Buddha, he said, I release you from your promise. And the Buddha said, as soon as you got beyond sense desire, I was free of the promise. How does Mara influence the three kinds of tanha? If we desire sensuality and becoming and annihilation, is this interaction with Mara? Well, these are in essence Mara's bag of tricks. That he will try and keep beings within samsara by beguiling them with sense desire, or desire for power, or desire, or if all else fails, self-destruction. It's not that Mara as an entity is acting all the time. He doesn't have to. We're our own worst enemies. We do this stuff to ourselves. Mara really only gets involved in the rare cases where someone is on the verge of escaping from samsara. And Mara gets worried, and he can intervene. But mostly we do it to ourselves. There's a commentarial definition of different kinds of Mara. and one of them is Mara Dewa Putta, meaning Mara the Dewa, Mara as an actual entity who interacted with the Buddha, for example. But there's a Mara Kalesa Mara. Kalesa Mara is Mara as defilement. There's our own self-generated defilements. We don't need an external source for that. Is allowing yourself to be satisfied with the object of meditation and samatha key to progress in samadhi, and in turn key to overcoming sense cravings? Yes, if you're content with the object of meditation, then you find your refuge there, and don't seek a refuge in sense desire. Then you can make progress. Sense desire is also, besides being in the second noble truth, it's also one of the five hindrances, which are mental states that obstruct meditation. So it's something to watch out for when you're trying to meditate, is the mind running off for sense objects. And it's often subtle. Like, we tend to think of craving as the obvious things like sex and food, but and particularly in terms of meditation and developing deep samadhi, just the kind of desire for pleasant surroundings, or or say the flip side of aversion. If you start finding yourself being averse to noise or temperature differences in the room, that's that's remaining tied up in the sense world. And remember that samadhi is practice leading out of the sense level. When you're in jhana, you're beyond the sense level existence. So as long as you're playing around with the five senses, you're not going to escape. You're not going to get to that next level. Next question. I heard Ajahn Brahm claim suttas say there is no separate vipassana and samatha practice, and both develop together. Or is the traditional Theravada approach more accurate of the suttas? I think I don't think there's any explicit statement that clear in the suttas, but the Buddha doesn't. Let's say the Buddha doesn't make a real distinction between vipassana and samatha. That's really a later traditional development to see to as techniques of meditation developed over time, it became more refined, and the experience of generations of practitioners, we have now very defined practices. In the suttas, you really hard. It's really hard to find explicit meditation instruction in the suttas, which I think was probably given, certainly must have been given by the Buddha, but probably in a more informal way to small groups. And we don't really have a record of the precise techniques used. So that things like the vipassana techniques, most of the vipassana techniques that we have, like the Mahasi method, Goenka method, so on, we can only really trace them back historically to maybe the 18th century at the most, the furthest back. Yeah. But that's not to say that they're invalid. Okay, next question. I am wondering whether tanha is always necessarily painful. Sexual desire seems like a combination of pleasure and pain, which makes it especially difficult for me. Well, tanha is experienced as a kind of a lack, a wanting. So it would be, by some definition, you could say it's painful, but it's not really. It's not pain as suffering. It's although it's the cause of suffering. It's a discontent in the mind, and a wanting, a moving towards an object. If a person commits suicide, is that due to desire for non-being, and where would their destination be? Yes, suicide is the extreme form of vibhava tanha, self-destruction, and it would lead to a lower rebirth, almost certainly, because um, the last moments, mind moments of such a person would be focused on vibhava tanha, desire not to be. Uh, okay. I'll take a few more questions. Um, it seems, let's see, okay, witnessing other beings act out of greed, aversion, delusion always cause painful feelings for those witnessing. Is it inherently painful? No. No, then if witnessing other beings acting unskillfully causes painful feeling, then the witnesser is not fully liberated. They're also in a state of craving. They're kind of craving for things to be other than they are. They're craving for beings not to be in those negative states. Are we and those close to us, like dear friends and family, karmically related in past lives? Yes. Yeah. There's a strong tendency to be reborn into the same circles again and again because of a karmic connection. I remember a sutta where a bhikkhu used a knife blamelessly. Yes, there is that one suicide is if someone's already an arahant, so they have no more, they don't make any further karma, and they're not going to take rebirth anyway, and they're suffering from a debilitating disease, so they can't function in the world anymore. Then there's no harm in them taking the knife. But that's only applies to an arahant. Why did Buddhism mostly die out in India? Now that's a big historical question. Give a short answer to it. There were both internal and external causes. The internal causes, it was becoming fractured into schools, and many of them were becoming corrupt, like falling into all kinds of strange false views. And there was external causes, and there were some Hindu kings that suppressed Buddhism, and then finally the Muslims came in and wiped it out, particularly the Turks. Okay, I think I'll take like 3 more questions, and then we'll call it. Would you consider rebirth in a rupa realms beneficial? Once you get out, it can be hit or miss to practice Dhamma, since you need to be in time the Dhamma is present. I think it's sort of a misleading question to ask. Is it beneficial? It's not. To be reborn into those kind of higher realms is certainly better than being reborn into the lower realms, but it's not beneficial in terms of developing towards nibbana, really, because you cannot attain nibbana while you're in the arupa realm. And as you say, you're going to be, if you after that you're reborn human, it's kind of hit and miss whether you'll be reborn into a time and place where Dhamma is known. But that would also depend on your karma too, whether you have the karma to be reborn into a good time. Is Sanskrit actually closer to the language the Buddha actually used? Since Pali simplified, changed a lot of words. Yeah, Pali, the relationship between Pali and Sanskrit. Sanskrit is older language. It's the classical language. But by the Buddhist time, no one was speaking Sanskrit anymore as a native tongue. Everybody was speaking in northern India what were called Prakrits, which were dialects derived from Sanskrit, just like French and Italian, Spanish are derived from Latin. Prakrits are derivatives of Sanskrit, and what the Buddha probably spoke was a dialect called Magadhan, and Pali was a formal, um, in a sense, artificial language that was designed to be a kind of common denominator between these different dialects, and probably didn't exist as such in the Buddha's time. Okay, so I think I'll call it for. There's still a lot of questions, but I think that's enough to deal with for today, and we'll see you again next week. And next week we're doing Third Noble Truth, which is the truth of liberation, the good news. Okay.